better? No. Any better? Is that better now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I think we've got sound now. 1, 2, 2, 2. Let me just crank that up a little. Oh, that don't sound good. 1, 2, 2, 2. 1, 2, 2. 1, 2. 2, 2, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. Is that better now? 1, 2. Oh, hang on. Hang on a minute. Sorry about this. I just realised what's going on there. Need that to be on high definition audio device. That should be better now. Is that better? Yeah. So thank you. The only way out is in for keeping me informed as to what was happening. Do you know what I made? The reason I look weird, that I look like I'm floating in space on the screen, is that I made a schoolboy error and wore a green shirt. So when you're doing green screen, it's probably like a really bad idea to wear a green shirt, which is what I've done. So I've got like a weird halo, yeah. But at least you can see some more books on the bookshelf now for some reason. I don't know why. I think because my camera's further away. I'm still playing around with the setup in here, so I've got my camera a bit further away. So I see Trevor on right, and the only way out is in. I've been in the chat. Hello, both of you. What is there to say for the week? Anything? Yeah, well, more like an aura around your head. Yeah, it's very weird. But I'll go with it. I'll take aura over some sort of dirty, muddy stain around my head instead. Yeah, so not much gone on this week. Not much sort of stuff that I can talk about anyway. So we're going to carry on with the chapter 8, which is the Ancient Adversary. How is this camera? Let me see if the camera can pick up the bookmark any better. That's the bookmark. Can you see it any better? I'm not sure. That's the bookmark anyway, that the only way out is in made. I don't think it can. You can't see the GOTAW lettering on it. Anyway. Yeah, so I've got the microphone the opposite way round today. The microphone's on this side, whereas normally it's on that side. I've got the candle is now behind my laptop, as normally it's to the side of the laptop. Yeah, and the camera's a lot further away, so I've still got a bit of tweaking to do, but I've just got to make a mental note not to wear a green shirt again next time. Oh, and I've got the light actually off in the room, so that might be making a bit of difference. Anyway, should we get on with get on with the book? Oh, it's weird this way round because I'm sort of, before I had my microphone over there, so it's having to look this way. Now I've got to look this way to the book. I might need to get a little lamp somewhere. So I think we got to the end of part 3, chapter 8. So let's carry on, part 4. The last bit of part 3 of chapter 8 was, in the light of these general speculations and in passing, can one now consider it coincidental that the socialist movement is referred to as the left wing, socialism being, of course, one of the trance conditions? Okay, so we're sort of in the middle of talking about the brain and the cerebellum, and how the cerebellum is a mirror of the cerebrum, a mirror image. The way it communicates with the body. So, part 4. Some further speculations involve a more detailed consideration of the midbrain. The midbrain in man contains primitive visual and secondary audition centres, which reside in what are termed the upper and lower colliculi, respectively. In pre-mammalian organisms, however, these are the principal centres for vision and hearing. In man, the midbrain is still centrally concerned in movements of the eyes. Situated just ahead of the midbrain is the pineal gland or pineal body. Although a vestigial organ in man, its evolutionary history is extremely interesting. In the lower vertebrates, it is a much more highly evolved organ and was originally bilateral, i.e. paired. In the lamprey, a still living lower vertebrate, the pineal body is sensitive to light and is visible below the skin. In certain reptiles, the development of this organ is still more considerable. It is believed that certain extinct reptiles and certain ancestors of vertebrate mammals possessed an additional pair of parietal eyes. The pineal gland in man is identified with what some mystics refer to as the third eye. Recalling in particular the views of C.T. Morgan and E. Steller that nature appeared originally to have intended making the cerebellum the chief organ of the nervous system, one considers again the exploded mammalian brain in figure 16. Figure 16. Which is that one, I believe, is that? That's figure 15. No, oh, it's figure 16. That is figure 16. Okay. In particular, the structures contained within the squared area. In the light of what has been added above concerning the pineal gland, do not the structures embraced by the square area constitute an organism within the organism? One has A, the remains of parietal eyes and centres for vision and hearing, the midbrain, and B, the cerebellum and the cerebellar cortex, strongly reminiscent in structure and function of the cerebrum and the cerebral cortex. These, moreover, also fully and independently linked to all organs and systems of the total nervous system below the level of the actual cerebrum itself. What follows next is speculation, but as such not wholly unjustified. While it would seem that the pineal gland in man is not directly sensitive to light, there is no automatic reason for supposing that the centres which it originally served do not still receive and interpret some stimuli as visual. If it seems surprising to argue that non-visual stimuli can create a visual sense impression, let us remember that electrical stimulation of the cortex of the temporal lobes produces visual and audial memories in the individual's mind. One speaks commonly, in any case, of the mind's eye. Moreover, even simple pressure on the lidded eyeball gives a perception of colour. Even if the suggestion is rejected, does there not still remain some possibility that at some stage of recapitulatory embryological development, these once active centres somehow might function to produce visual activity in the brain of the embryo? Quite what form this might take is again a matter for speculation, but the attractiveness, to me, of the idea of a somehow visual cerebellum lies in the fact that if the cerebellar organism could in any way see, that is, experience visually, the cerebral cortex as it arches over it, it might well perceive this as a firmament filled with bright soaring angels, that is, Greek agelos, messengers. This must rank as the most improbable idea so far produced by this volume. Yet is anything more improbable than our own existence? All this being as it may or may not be, we still have the unexplained fact that premature babies spend more time in rapid eye movement sleep than full-term babies. Do full-term babies show this activity in the womb? Or is it a side effect of being born prematurely? One is, of course, quite ready to accept that the actual eye movements, governed principally by the midbrain, are automatic. Their functioning in these circumstances resembles somewhat the action of pedals on a fixed-wheel bicycle. When the cycle rolls downhill, the pedals turn automatically and involuntarily, in sympathy with the movement of the back wheel. Wow, so even back in 1972, that they were talking about fixed-wheel bicycles. Whatever else, the question remains, why should the midbrain be unusually active in premature babies and possibly in babies within the womb? Part 5. The cerebellum, it has been proposed, is the mirror image of the cerebrum. Mirrors, the surfaces of ponds and other bodies of water, are some of the gateways to the land of dreams and fairyland. A visit to the magic world through one of these gates, such as Alice's excursion through the looking glass, is also a further version of the journey already discussed. As already observed, in many cases, the passage into the various kinds of make-believe world is often difficult, being narrow, dark, precipitous. Other stories, however, describe the entry as easy, seductively easy, in fact, but the return as difficult. Many stories contain this theme: Tannhauser, Pinocchio, Rip Van Winkle, Goblin Market, etc. This contradiction, which need not delay us too much at this point, arises possibly from the frame of mind in which the journey is undertaken. If one is prepared to abandon one's hold on everyday reality or waking consciousness, and to accept the unconscious wholly on its terms, the entry is easy. Conversely, the return is difficult because one has in effect forfeited the means of return. But if one seeks to enter the unconscious on one's own terms, with consciousness, personal integrity, meaning waking integrity, hold on reality and so on, intact, then the way is difficult and danger dogs every step. In this, consider the journey of the Greek heroes into the underworld, the world of the dead, which they entered living. And then we have a passage from the Ennead. The way is easy to the Avernian flood. Black Pluto's gates stand open day and night, but to return and view ethereal light, that is a work, a labour. Also, Matthew 7:13, wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction. So we've got some good little quotes there. Hello, Trevaunt. We require then a physiological model in which either an entry or a return is somehow difficult, somehow not straightforward, somehow dangerous. We require also a sojourn in a strange world or universe where things are not as they should be in reality terms, but range through the wonderful, miraculous, magical, back to front, reversed, wrong, evil, and sexual. Somewhere too where one is or whence one returns in some way or other changed. Earlier, examining sleep and dreaming sleep, a state of affairs somewhat approximating to the journey and the country just described was found. Is it possible to add to the picture by a further examination of the physiology of the nervous system? What if the pathways to and from the cerebellum, which we now more than suspect to be involved in sleeping, to the cerebrum are considered? If consciousness somehow moved along the cortico-ponto-cerebellar tract into the cerebellum and thence returned, either completely or partially, via the midbrain path to the cerebral cortex, in particular perhaps to the temporal lobes, the storehouse of conscious memory, vacated now by waking consciousness, would this movement not meet most of the stipulated conditions of the journey? The narrowness of the entrance and or exit is met, since clearly the cross-section of the pons and the midbrain are tiny compared with the open reaches of both the cerebral and the cerebellar cortex, where the association and projection areas offer a universe of activity and of being. The feeling of danger could arise from the fact that consciousness is lost, the valley of the shadows, perhaps, or shifted, that by switching off the normal function of the cerebrum almost completely, we run the greatest of risks. It has already been pointed out that in paradoxical sleep, the organism is most completely at the mercy of predators. Figure 20. Figure 20. Oh no, keep going. Oh, here we go. We haven't got figure 20 in here. I have got figure 20. I'll find it. It's similar to this one here. Figure 20 shows the suggested afferent cerebral route within the brain viewed from above. The crossing of the impulses on the journey back from the cerebellum will be noted. Perhaps from this derives the great power of the symbol of the cross. Certainly one of the surest and most widely known methods of invoking the devil was to sacrifice an animal at a crossroads at midnight. With this so appropriate thought, we consider figure 21, in which the root lines are if extended, bring us now face to face with the ancient enemy of mankind. I'm going to have to find this because, yeah, this is quite a good image. Hold on. Talk amongst yourselves for a minute. I'm just going to find my slides. For some reason, it doesn't load up all my slides whenever I try and load them up. It's only these last three that we've got to try and bring up. Okay, so here we go. This is the with this so appropriate thought, we consider figure 21, in which the root lines, if extended, bring us now face to face with the ancient enemy of mankind. Or, to be quite precise, the ancient enemy of Cro-Magnon. The description given in the caption of the previous figure, figure 20, is only one of several possible physiological infraprocesses. Another possible, not involving the afferent pathways from the cerebrum to the cerebellum at all, would be to suggest that whereas waking consciousness is the reticular activation of the cerebral cortex, sleeping consciousness is the cerebellar activation of the cerebral cortex. However, there are, as we have seen, good reasons for believing that sleeping consciousness resides at least in part in the cerebellum itself, and further of these are discussed below. Yet other physical peculiarities of the cerebellum are of particular interest. While full consideration of these would take us too far, it will be seen from the following extract that there is some underpinning for our next statement about the nature of sleeping consciousness and the cerebellum. If we now go on to see what fibres leave the cerebellar cortex, we run into another interesting arrangement. There are many fibres that we might call motor fibres leaving the cerebellar cortex, but few, if any, go out of the cerebellum. There are a few that go back from the cerebellar cortex to the vestibular nuclei of the medulla, but there are not many of them. Instead, all of the so-called motor fibres from the cerebellar cortex go to the subcortical nuclei of the cerebellum and stop there. That's from C.T. Morgan and E. Steller. We know that the cerebrum houses a motor system which also receives extensive sensory and emotional information, that is, projections from the lower centres. One could say that the cortex has real movement and the sensation of emotion. Since so far all of the attributes of System B have proved to be the opposite of System A, can one say that the cerebellum has real emotion but only the sensation of movement, that is, via projections from motor centres? The meaning of the foregoing is clearer if we consider what happens in dreams. The feelings that we then experience are unquestionably real and actual. When we wake up from a frightening dream, the panic is still with us. So also for depression, elation, etc. What is more, we demonstrate the actual physiological concomitants of feeling. We have an actual erection. We literally sweat with fear. Our heart races and so on. But the movement that takes place in dreams is imaginary. Our body remains in bed. True, we turn and jerk occasionally, but we do not actually get entrained, go into the kitchen, walk through a field. It may be argued that in waking consciousness we nevertheless do experience real emotion. One must insist, however, that what we then experience is a projection of emotion, which is not to say that the real emotion is not going on somewhere, of course. First, it is possible, at least sometimes, to, e.g., refuse to feel pity, even though we know that pity is somehow trying to get through to us or rise up in us and to stem our anger or govern our despair. Psychotics, in particular, manage a much stronger such split between waking consciousness and emotion. None of this, however, would be possible unless the emotion originated, that is, first existed somewhere outside or below consciousness. It exists and then we deny it. Sometimes we deny also the fact that we are denying. As Freud states, in a similar context, in repression, the act of repression is also repressed, so that, to return to our example, it really seems as if there is no emotion there. Thus, a patient may often quite genuinely dumbfounded at the suggestion that he, for instance, hates his mother. At the same time, coincidentally, he is the victim of acute asthma or ulcer or migraine attacks on the days she comes to see him. There's a bit of German new medicine there. The consideration of movement in dreams leads on to an important point, which is first reinforced by a further factual observation. The cerebellum achieves its greatest importance in birds. It is there the major organ for coordinating the sensory and motor impulses involved in flying. What has the present inquiry found to say about flying? First, it was noted that Freud believed flying in dreams to indicate sexual intercourse. We know further that in magic and legend, those who fly best, most vigorously, and most often are sexually mature women. From chapter 2. Now, indeed, one is perhaps in a position to understand more clearly the significance of the witch, her flying, and the means by which she flies. Before moving on to further physiological data, however, we turn initially to that never-failing, best of all standbys, language. It would seem to be no coincidence that so many of our metaphors for love, sex and women involve flying and matters associated with flying. The word bird itself is a slang usage for a woman or girl dates only from the 19th century. However, this is derived from a standard English usage having the same meaning, which occurred for the first time in print in the 13th century and is no doubt older. Aside from numerous more or less flattering epithets like chick, dove, pigeon, it is said that an inconstant girl is flighty. The marital home is a love nest. One's heart has wings. Love-making is billing and cooing. A browbeaten husband is henpecked. A woman fussing over her children like a mother hen. And finally, many unflattering references to women's verbal behaviour have bird overtones, chattering, cackling, screeching, and so on. One is entitled, of course, to regard these as mere metaphors. It is instructive, however, to see how many metaphors relating to other animals one can think of in this area. There are not many. Can it be, then, that some aspects of a woman's sexual behaviour, unconsciously, reminds us of birds for an actual physiological reason? This notion may prove more acceptable in the light of what follows. What are we on? 9 o'clock. Let's have a quick look at the chat. Weltgeist Zupferde, I forgot how speculatory Stan could be. Yeah, you shouldn't forget how speculatory Stan could be. And most, he's working from the top down, not from the bottom up. So he does do a lot of speculation. But so it's a sort of a revolutionary idea. So you're going to have to speculate at some point. The only way, oh yeah, you're just saying hello to each other. Okay, good. Excellent. So we're on to part 6 of chapter 8. If the cerebellum is essentially associated with system B, particularly system B1, and is in fact the seat of sleeping consciousness, one would expect this organ somehow to play a greater or more active role in women than in men. This might reveal itself in a number of ways, for example, by relatively stronger EEG activity. Another of these ways, however, might be in terms of actual physical size or weight. A paper published in 1920 by R.S. Ellis offers some relevant and extremely interesting research findings. In reporting some of these at this point, I do not claim that they represent a finality in terms of proof, no more than does Ellis himself, but merely that they constitute a prima facie case meriting further investigation, and at the same time one which is extremely pertinent to the arguments of this book. That attention should since have drifted away from the implications of these and other findings may perhaps seem less surprising in the light of material in chapter 13. Table 7a shows the relative weights of the human cerebellum, expressed as a percentage of the encephalon, the whole brain, in male and female babies during the first months of life. Let's see if I've got that one. I think that's it. You might have to get close up and squint. Table 7b shows further such comparative weights in later life. We note first that the female cerebellum in the majority of cases exceeds the male cerebellum in relative weight. Only in 2 instances is this position reversed, and then only by 0.1%. Clearly, on these figures, the female cerebellum is, on average, relatively the larger. In electing to attach great significance to a slight statistical difference, I must emphasise the following point. We are dealing here with a gross level of physiological, or rather anatomical difference. This level cannot be expected to reflect the subtleties and ramifications of psychological difference, except in the most general way. Thus, for example, if a life form from outer space found on Earth, a male and female skeleton, the slightly larger pelvis and pelvic girdle of the female would not be sufficient to produce a description of the womb and the process of childbirth, much less of the myriad intricacies and complications of sexual behaviour. Returning to matters in hand, already at the beginning of the 19th century, F.J. Gall proposed a connection between the cerebellum and sexual instincts. This view was subsequently much criticised and is today considered to be discredited. For example, in 1839, F. Luray examined the relative weight of the cerebella of stallions, mares and geldings, i.e. castrated male horses. His results are reproduced in Table 8. Do we have Table 8? Oh, yes. If, so the argument ran, the cerebellum was associated with sexuality, one would expect to find its role, and hence presumably its size, diminished in the gelding, not increased, as is the case. 2 points can be made concerning this conclusion. First, one must always be cautious in attempting to explain normal function on the basis of abnormal or pathological cases, such as the gelding constitutes. But much more importantly, I believe that the views of Gall and others were defeated only because of their far too narrow definition of sexuality. If one spoke, rather, to use the terminology of an earlier chapter, of the female and the male principles, System A and System B and System A respectively, the criticisms lose much of their point. For, taking Luray's results, it is, after all, surprising to find that in a situation where the male subsystem of the personality is deliberately destroyed, that the female subsystem has expanded to fill the vacuum. That is, in the absence of competition, is able to assume an unnatural dominance. Reverting to the general argument, the relative differences in the human male and female cerebellum might be enhanced if, instead of a random sample of women, Certain selected groups of women chosen along lines already suggested and to be further suggested, say left-handed women, were compared with men. One would, further, very much like to know, quite apart from within species differences, what the relative cerebellar differences are between generally female species, such as the cat, to whom women are often likened, and the male species, such as the dog. Specifically, one proposes that the relative weight of the cerebellum would be greater in cats than in dogs. There are already hints in the literature that this may prove to be so. In the rabbit, the cerebellum of the female clearly exceeds that of the male throughout the whole of the life period. Luray's data, quoted above, suggests that the same might be true of the horse. The rabbit is noted for its fecundity. The horse is a symbol of virility. Let us meantime not forget in this context that the cerebellum in human beings is heavily involved in skilled movements and posture in general, and that on tests involving skilled movements girls score higher than boys, and that the ballet and dance is one of the few professional activities in which women's performances might be said to absolutely exceed that of men. It is also a coincidence that women outdo men on all items of verbal behaviour except comprehension, and that birds are the best speakers, i.e. parroters, in nature apart from man himself. That the one example of the spontaneous, meaningful use of language by an animal ever noted in the literature was from a bird, Conrad Lorenz's raven. Is it another coincidence that the group of animals which have excited the attention of psychologists in recent years as possibly being in the process of producing a language, the porpoises, are a mammal which has returned to the sea and therefore, in common with all the great swimmers and flyers, has a characteristically well-developed cerebellum? Is it yet another coincidence that women are easier to hypnotise than men, and that the easiest animal to hypnotise are birds and reptiles? Birds, of course, evolved from reptiles. When a human being is hypnotised, the eyes remain open but do not see. Reptiles sleep without closing their eyes. A bird is strong on cerebellum but weak on cerebral cortex. I'll answer the question at the end, Weltgeist, mate. Sorry. Apes and chimpanzees are relatively much better endowed cerebrally. Yet it is the bird that speaks, not the ape. The porpoise, not the chimpanzee. It is possible that what we see in birds is the cerebellum making its bid to become the dominant organ of the nervous system. Is it possible that what we see in birds is the cerebellum making its bid to become the dominant organ of the nervous system? Is it possible that the cerebellum in women is somehow responsible for, amongst many other things, their greater verbal endowment over men? Is it possible to go on using the word coincidence in this context? Taking this last now with all that has been suggested and defended in previous chapters and in the present chapter, I propose that it is the cerebellum which is the follower, the doppelganger, the devil who dogs our footsteps on the lonely path, and for whom one may not look back. Lot's wife became a pillar of salt, was changed when she looked back, and Orpheus lost the reclaimed Eurydice to the underworld for a second time and forever when he looked back to see if she was following him. Christ too said, "Get thee behind me, Satan," i.e. back to your proper place. The physical position of the cerebellum can tell us why the route to the unconscious is backwards and downwards. This too is why knowledge, or knowledge too, wisdom, is a well and Hades a pit. Flying in dreams and flights of fancy in daydreams, also when we get high or ecstatic, all these expressions are the release of the cerebellar consciousness, the unconscious, from its prison under the cerebrum. Zeus, one recalls, had imprisoned the Titans under the earth, as well as paralleling the actual role of the cerebellum in those animals which fly. The cerebrum is forever haunted and dogged by the cerebellum. Compare the Greek Furies, Harpies, and so on. Man in general is pursued by his animal past. The escape route of the cerebrum is also upwards and outwards. If only we can run fast enough, jump high enough, we shall be able to escape the cerebellum, the animal within us. This, of course, is a doomed hope. We cannot help but take the cerebellum with us wherever we go. It clings to our back like the old man of the sea, like Pilgrim's burden, like Quasimodo's hump. The hump, the burden, is indeed nothing other than the symbolic cerebellum. So too the dwarf, like Punch, is misshapen and small, a toiler and dweller in darkness. The symbolic cerebellum takes many other forms, some of which we have already examined. It can be anything, which is some or all of these: small, valuable, magical, different, hidden away, lost. Aladdin's lamp is a further instance of the Holy Grail yet another. On a much larger scale, the cerebellum is Atlantis, the lost world. In the light of the fearful or persecutory aspects of the cerebellum, we can now understand the spaceman whose parasitic spirit fell away from him when he left the Earth for free space, and the space scientist who remained trapped in the body of the ape. 20th century man is both of these during his waking hours. During those waking hours, he drives the stake into the heart of the sleeping vampires as the latter lies helpless. But when night again falls, or the moon is full, it is once again, as ever, the vampire's turn. So too, in the face of every advance by rational man, the old enemy has risen again, apparently unweakened. In the next chapter, though, we shall very much question the appropriateness of the terms animal and enemy as applied to this part of our nature, that is, to System B. It may be that if we would only embrace this side of our personality, instead of staking or imprisoning it, the frog or beast would become a prince, able to lead us back to the lost world or the Garden of Eden. So that's the end of chapter 8, the Ancient Adversary. And Ralph Hexham has entered the game. Hello, Ralph Hexham. So the next bit is part 4, The Lost World. I'm just going to see how long it is, because power politics in the nervous system. Because I don't think I've got the graphics for this, but we could go into it. So Weltgeist zu Beferde. I hope that's how I say it. I can't say it very fast. Do you call yourself the last student of Stan Gooch because you were the only person covering his work, or because you were actually a student of his? I basically started reading Stan Gooch's work, and then I wrote to him, and then I became friends with Stan Gooch, and then I spent a long time, like 5 years, studying with him, meeting, talking, going over his work, revising parts and getting his feedback, and going through every single book. I managed to help him get one of his books republished, and then also sort of was around for the last when he wrote his last book, just in general sort of kept him going for the last few years of his life, really, up until the time he died. And then I now also have his archive, basically, because the council was going to clear his caravan and destroy everything, so I went and recovered as much stuff as I could, and have it sort of kept safe for him. So yeah, both really. Yes, I am the only person covering his work. That is true. Although this actually doing this channel has brought me in touch with a few other people who are covering his work in different ways. Seems to be like I've met a lot of musicians, really, over the years. I've met a lot of musicians that are into Stan Gooch. I don't know why it's musicians. I'm a musician as well myself, so and that was how I initially got in contact with Stan, was through a musical project that I was doing, and I wanted to involve Stan in that project. And at the same time, there was another group of people also making a musical project with Stan Gooch. So it's sort of all of a sudden he got a sort of a peak of interest from musicians at the same time. So it sort of lifted his spirits for a couple of years, and then but he was pretty much just sort of resigned to dying by the end of his life. So these things were just sort of temporary things that pulled him out of his slump for a couple of months or a year or so. But yeah, I did spend a lot of time with him, and yeah, I think I would have considered him my master at the time, because I did learn a lot from Stan Gooch. I've learned a lot from his work, but I also was able to talk to him every month about it and sort of run things by him that I'd read, or like bring him new information that he maybe didn't know about, because he stopped researching probably, I suppose like early 90s or something. So I met him mid 2000s. Yeah, I actually tried to get him a place in London so that I could get him out of Swansea, but we, between like me and one of his old friends, an old friend from school, we was trying to sort of coordinate him moving back into London, which that would have been quite good to have at the time it felt like a sort of return, like there was going to be some sort of return, that he was going to get him back. I'd arranged interviews for him on Coast to Coast at the time. A publisher called Inner Traditions had helped us get Coast to Coast connection, which was really weird, because I was just a fan of Coast to Coast at the time. And then, but he couldn't do it. It worked out too complicated, because he would have had to have been on a phone, and he didn't have a phone. And but I did hear, do you know who's really into Stan Gooch's work but doesn't really talk about it? Is the Egyptologist guy, not John Anthony West, the Robert Schoch. So Professor Robert Schoch from, I believe he's from like Massachusetts or something. He's really into Stan Gooch, but he doesn't really talk about it. So I'm not to like bitch about someone, another person on the internet, but I was listening to Coast one day, or because I used to download Coast to Coast every day and listen to that. And he was on there, and then he for the last hour of his interview, he started talking about the sort of the cerebrum cerebellum type model, and where it would possibly come from and all this stuff. And he didn't mention Stan Gooch once, and he had George Snorri really interested in it, and oh wow, really, oh wow, and all this, and I was like, well, this just sounds like Stan's work, really. So I wrote to Robert Schoch and said, yeah, I don't know whether you heard of this researcher called Stan Gooch. And he replied, oh yeah, cool, so yeah, I love Stan Gooch. And then there's a film out there by a Romanian filmmaker, and she is friends with Robert Schoch, and I think they interview Robert Schoch in that film, and some of the stuff they mention in that, it's about the pyramids, or the Sphinx in Romania. So it's about the Carpathian Sphinx, I think it's called. And they talk about some of the stuff to do with Stan's work at the end of that. They talk about, I mean, maybe there's an interview with Stan at the end or something, I think. Yeah, so over the years, there's been a lot of a lot of interest, and particularly when I knew him, there was like a repeated interest. There was like something coming up that he was, being mentioned again, and started becoming more mentioned, and more sort of awareness brought about, about his name. But it sort of like died down, and especially after he died in 2010, it sort of went really quiet for him. I think there was an obituary in the Telegraph or something written by one of his friends. So yeah, that's my connection to Stan Gooch. I've got some interesting things like letters that people wrote to him. Some people that wrote him letters, or that commissioned him to do work. You'd be shocked, to say the least. You'd be shocked, to say the least, at who this person was, who I've got a letter from. And what he says in that letter. And then one day I'll put it out, but I'll probably get a call from Special Branch. What else we got? Trevon Wright, do you think that the cerebellum is responsible for the spiritual enlightenment? I think that's what Gooch is saying in this book, is that, and the people, obviously everyone's got their own viewpoints on what spiritual enlightenment is. Now I've obviously read a lot of Stan Gooch's stuff. I've talked to him. It's not, I don't know. I think it makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I've been studying his work with him. I studied his work with him for a long time, and then studied it on my own and applied it on my own, and talked to other people about it, and read other work and all this sort of thing. And the basic premise is that the structure of the brain creates a sense of a world that we live within. Okay, so one part of our brain is creating a world of science, and that impression that part of the brain leaves on the world is science. And so a collective of human beings who all think in a certain way and have a dominant part of their brain active most of the time leads us towards a more scientific society. And that a collective of human beings that have a more dominant system B leads us towards a more religious society. And that people who are more system A, which is the more scientific-minded people, their attempt to sort of reconcile this imbalance in themselves leads to things like spiritual enlightenment. So they search out something called spiritual enlightenment, whereas the system B people are living within a mindset that is dominated by a quote unquote spirituality, but that all of these are just inventions or creations or projections of the mind, and that because we are a hybrid, the world we've created around us is different to the world that a squirrel created around it, or is different to the world that a horse created around it. Horses don't have the same conflicts in horses that humans have. So humans, being a hybrid, are in conflict all of the time, both within themselves and in society at large, which is made up. Society is just made up of humans. Okay, so if humans are in conflict in their own head, then if the majority of humans are in conflict in their head, then society is in conflict, and that's what we see. We see society in conflict unless we look back to the past and we see things like the golden age, when we say, oh yeah, but they never used to be in conflict. Yeah, because they weren't us. So we are in conflict. They were, we came from them, and they were not hybrids, so they weren't really in conflict. Or they may have been hybrids, I don't know, but they weren't the hybrids that we are, which is from two completely opposing pre-humans or hominids or whatever you call them. So this book isn't so much about it because he hasn't really reached the stage of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon yet. I think he does go into it in a little bit of this, but really that comes into play in the third book, The Neanderthal Question, which is when Stan really tries to sort of cover the hybrid. I don't think he even thought about us being a hybrid in 1972. I think this is why I say he works from the top down, not the bottom up, is because he tried to take a snapshot of human life in 1972, because there was a movement towards this idea of enlightenment and what did they used to call it? Consciousness or something, consciousness raising, or like the age of Aquarius, the new age. There was all this stuff. The term new age didn't really exist then. It was just a group of people that were saying, well, but what if this, what if that, and they was investigating drugs, and they was investigating bloody ways of liberating yourself and all the rest of it. We can see where that's gone, but he was also part of that. But he was in his 40s at that time. He's late 30s, early 40s in 1972, and so for him, he was trying to take a snapshot of life, and then try and see where we were going. Where would this all lead us? Where would biology and physics? What's the total sum of knowledge of man? What is the total man? What's the sum of our knowledge at that? The snapshot of the sum of our knowledge at that point in time about ourselves and our mind and where we were going with it. And that leads on to personality and evolution, where he talks about the evolution of the human personality, and then on to the third book, which is where he sort of come to the uneasy conclusion that man was some kind of hybrid. And yeah, so we'll move on to that one as well. But essentially, if you're a religious person, you probably will think that Stan Gooch is a bit of an atheist of some kind or whatever. And if you're a scientific person, by the time we get to the paranormal, if you're a scientifically minded person, you're probably going to think Stan Gooch is an absolute fucking nut job. Okay, so just try and see it from both points of view. Is that lots of people don't like him, so don't feel like you've got to, I'm not really getting on with this because I'm a religious person. Okay, fine. That's all right. But just try and take it on board for what it is. It's just more information. There's no point in dismissing something just because you've got your own setup that you're trying to retain through thick and thin, and people trying to destroy it. And he's not trying to destroy anybody's way of thinking. He's trying to just make sense of something. So really, Gooch's work, he's attempting to stand outside of all of the arguments and just try and take a snapshot of what's going on from outside of it all. I don't think he's trying to destroy religion. I don't think he's trying to destroy science. I mean, he's trying to revise both in a way, I suppose. The only way out is in. Monkey on my back is also addiction speak, which is part of habit pattern suppression in layers of mind. We call unconscious mind. That's a really good one. Monkey on your back. Yeah, that's like a heroin thing or something, isn't it? Yeah. So it's that feeling that you got something on the back. And the only way out is in at Trevorn. I don't know whether to read. Would you read out people's messages to each other? Spiritual enlightenment is attained by developing equanimity towards sensations. It's a path for a committed spiritual warrior. I can show you the way, but it's your work to do. Yeah, I can show you, but I'll have to kill you eventually. That's what the only way out is in is saying. No, the only way out is in has some good spirituality stuff. The only way out is in context of this level of psychology. It would take much longer, as there doesn't seem to be much emphasis on working with somatic realm, which is ruled by the cerebellum. Ralph Hexham, give us a clue. The only way out is in her. So if that's so, I don't agree with Stan about spiritual enlightenment, but that's okay. I suppose that was about I've worked with mind purification for Vipassana for 26 years and can say for sure that there are folk from all tendencies, system A or B, who are interested in working towards enlightenment, not just A. No, that's not what I'm saying, and that's not what Gooch is saying either. I'm just saying that people who are more system A minded, more scientific minded, so say like Europeans who are more system A, as we can see from their societies, that their idea of spiritual enlightenment is that there's something in the way of their enlightenment. Okay, that's all I'm saying, is that the idea that you have to get enlightened to something means that there's something blocking you being enlightened. So that's all I'm saying, is that system A people, the actual idea of spiritual enlightenment is a sort of system A thing, because it's harder for system A people to get spiritually enlightened. There's all sorts of disciplines for spirituality. I don't think he's judging any one of them, and I don't think any one of them is, anyone is any better than any other one. It's just whatever works for whatever person. There probably should be as many forms of spirituality as there are people. I think that's, partly what I get out of Gooch's work, is that spirituality is a subjective thing which other people can't impose on other people. So someone can't tell you how to worship God, and science is an attempt to try and put something solid down, a solid position on something, such as the sun always rises in the morning, and maps of the, maps and charts of days of the week and months, and mapping the hours in the day and how many points of an hour you're going to need before you need a leap year, and all this sort of stuff. That's all the sort of system A stuff. The system B stuff is really just more subjective. No one can tell you who God is and what he should be, or she should be. Anyway, okay, so we'll save chapter 9 for next week. So that's going to be power politics in the nervous system. Thanks everyone again for listening and joining in with the chats. Oh, hang on. Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you said science-based people were searching for spiritual enlightenment as a result. But no. No, that's not what I'm saying. Hope it was okay, the clarification. The only way out is in. So yeah, I'm gonna knock it on the head for the night. Fremen on the Sand. Just missed out. Yeah. But it's all right. You can go and watch it again. That's the whole beauty of of never mind, I'll rewatch tomorrow morning. There you go. That's right. Good to see you anyway in the chat. Say goodbye to everyone. Ralph, Trevorn, I've got to get the name right. What is it? Weltgeist, Tazu Paferde, The Only Way Out is In, Fremen on the Sand. Good. Have a good night's sleep, everyone. And I'll see you again next week. Ta-da.